The Sound Off Podcast. The show about podcast and broadcast. Starts now.
Rob, how on earth did you ever decide to get into radio?
That's a long answer to that question.
It's a podcast. We have all day.
We have all day, right?
Take as much time as you need.
So when I was about 8 or 9, the age my son is now, I was sitting in my grandmother's kitchen listening to the radio, and I was listening to a host called Dave Lee Travis, known as the hairy cornflake in England, and he was doing a quiz on the radio, and I was immediately enamored with the whole concept of radio, and specifically the fact that contest he was playing was played every single day. And there was a daily connection with the audience, which I thought was different to television. And I thought, man, that seems so cool. You get to do that not once a week. You get to do that every single day. And I thought, that's something I want to do. I want to do that with my life. And I want to spend, the rest of my career or the rest of my future doing radio. But that was a hard thing to do. I didn't end up doing radio until I was like 28 years old. But it all started there. It started there as a 8-9-year-old boy. But gosh darn it, was it a hard slog getting into radio from there. It never really seemed like it was ever going to happen until it finally did.
So what'd you do between the ages of, say, 18 and 28?
So I went to university. I wanted to get into radio, but radio schools didn't really seem to exist at that age when I was in England. There was no NATE, there was no SAIT, there was no Humber College, there was no BCIT, there was no Red River College. So I didn't know what to do. So I went to university, I studied politics and history, and I kind of did what people my age did, which was go to university and do a bachelor's degree. But when I got to university, they had a student radio station, and it took me about 2 years to get the courage to go to do student radio. And I finally did it. And I was absolutely horrific at it. I mean, just terrible. I mean, it couldn't have gone much worse. And when I left, I went and got an office job and still wanted to do radio, but it just didn't seem to be something that people like me did. That just didn't seem to be an option to me. And then I went backpacking when I was 23, 24. And I met a load of people that just gave me a whole sense of confidence, that maybe there was something in me that I could maybe perform or do something in the entertainment sphere. I bet a stand-up comedian from New Zealand, a guy called Steve Wrigley, who's gone on to do radio and such great things in New Zealand. And he gave me a load of confidence, and a load of other friends did. And when I came back, I signed up to do hospital radio in the UK. I'm not sure if you're aware of hospital radio. But it's for those that don't know, every radio station in the UK, so every hospital in the UK has a radio station, and it's run by volunteers. It's not a bad standard, to be fair, for what is a completely charitable endeavor. And it's where a lot of people get their start, because again, it's difficult to get your start in the UK. It's tough. There wasn't a lot of commercial radio when I grew up. There wasn't a lot of schooling. What do? Just knock on the door of the BBC and say, "Can I have a show?" It doesn't. It's tough to do. And from that, I started to think to myself, maybe this is something I could do. Again, I was terrible at it. There wasn't a huge amount of support that I was getting in terms of success at hospital radio. But alongside all of this, I am in a relationship with a girl from Canada. And I'd met her when I was backpacking. I'd been in Canada backpacking. And she said, look, we've got to make a move here if we're going to make this work. And I think you should move to Canada. And I said, I'm fine to do that, but I've got to do radio at the same time. I've just got to do it. It's something I've wanted to do since I was 8. I can't not try this. I've got to try it. And there was nothing pushing me to do that. As I say, everything had been awful up until this point in terms of what I was producing in terms of output, but I wanted to do it. And she found me the course at Humber College, which in turn offered me an immigration path because I was a Canadian student. And literally the day that I walked into Humber College in 2008, it was like a light bulb went off. And suddenly the doors to radio opened. And it was a lot of hard work from 2008 to now. But everything I've been doing in England, pushing against a brick wall, since I was 8. Suddenly at Humber, it was like, if you work hard enough, if you move, if you sacrifice, if you do your air checks, if you go to all the small towns, there's a career here for you. And that's proven to be the case.
So Humber College, that's some Sam Cooke territory right there, right?
Yeah, Humber College. Yeah. Humber College was the place. It really was. Neil Mather was my teacher. It was a 9 months I was there. 9 months, but that was huge. That was absolutely huge for me.
Okay, so we've heard hospital radio a few times on this podcast. What exactly gets said or done on hospital radio? What do we need to communicate to the patients?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting time. As I say, it was a lot more professional than I think people would give it credit for. Certainly more than student radio. I mean, student radio was just the people just jumping in, and there was some equipment, and you messed around. This, we had voice tracking. We had a format. We had music scheduling, which I thought was of a pretty decent standard considering it's all run by volunteers. The shows I mostly did the whole idea was to play requests for patients. I mean, that's really the whole idea of hospital radio, is to go up to the wards and to speak to patients, get requests, and give them that level of, connectivity and personalization. Obviously things have changed. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was no television on the wards. All you had was radio. But even so, nowadays, there's a lot of lonely people in hospitals, people that are there for a long time, there for months at a time. Some people don't have family. And the only people they sometimes see are either their nurses, their doctors, or the person coming around from hospital radio. Now, to be honest, did I also do it to try and do something creative and try and push my career? Sure, I did. And people do that. But we had a program director, we had a music director. There was some weird radio going on. I got to let you know at the same time. Like there were some people because there's no guidance. There are some people doing some of the strangest radio I've ever heard in my life. But that was part of the eccentricity of it, and I think it's very British at the same time. Just a load of eccentric British people trying to make radio with a teeny little bit of structure, and then a whole load of nothing, and then trying to serve patients at the top. It's a wild world out there.
So you go from the UK, and where by the way in the UK? We never really established where in the UK you were.
From Basingstoke, England, which is about 40 miles southwest of London. So it's kind of it's a commuter town basically.
And the other thing we have to establish is, what's your football club?
Tottenham Hotspur.
Okay.
Tottenham Hotspur Football Club is my third child and my third parent. So yeah. I love them dearly.
And that's a London-based team.
They're from North London. Yeah, my dad was a fan. Cheered for them when he was a kid, and then passed on the affliction, I suppose I have to call it, because they haven't won much over the since I've been alive, anyway. But yeah, it's a great bond for me and my dad cheering for that team together.
And so for those, I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast, they'll understand maybe a little bit about football, but they know it from NBC has it on Saturday mornings. So how many London-based teams are there? There are about 6, I guess, right?
No, there's more than that. There's like 5 or 6 in the Premier League, but if you look at the entire...
Oh, I was only talking Premier League because that's all that's shown
Premier
on
League,
the
there's about 5 or 6, but in terms of professional clubs, there's about 11 or 12. I mean, there's a huge amount of... I mean, considering most other towns have 2, like Manchester, Sheffield, Bristol have 2. But Liverpool only has 2. London has a ridiculous amount of clubs. Considering when you look at even North American sports, like New York only has 2 football teams and 2 baseball teams. It's insane how many football clubs there are in London.
Well, anyone can start one, and anyone can take it all the way to the top, right?
That is, and as Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney are trying to show with Wrexham, right? I mean, it can officially be done. You can go from the absolute bottom to the top. Now, that used to happen a bit more often, 40, 50 years ago. Nowadays, you need an awful lot of money. But Rob and Ryan do have money, and maybe on Welcome to Wrexham, you'll see them achieve that. I mean, they're pretty close. They're only 2 divisions off making the Premier League right now. So they're getting close.
Yeah. And just from what I see, though, it looks like you get to this point and the money kind of it becomes a wrecking zone where they are right now, where you have to get from like 3, 2, 1, the 3 and the 2 to get up to number 1. It feels like it's going to cost a lot of money, and you can really lose yourself in that zone.
Yeah, 100%. It's without getting. I'm not going to talk about football all day long. I know this is a radio podcast, but it's my, as I say, it's my huge love. What you find when you get to the division that the Wrexham are in League One, if they get promoted, they'll get to the Championship, which is one below the Premier League. At that stage, what you have and the difficulty you have is you have teams from the Premier League being relegated. And when they're relegated and they come down a division, financially, they get what they call parachute payments,
Sure.
which means the Premier League still gives them money for 3 years. And that is what kind of sets off this hyperinflation in the league, is that obviously 3 teams are coming down each year. You've got various amounts of clubs in the Championship, probably about 7 or 8, who are all still feeding off of Premier League money, and they're spending it because they desperately need to get back. And that's where a club like Wrexham comes in. They've not got anything close to that money. They're going to need it either from owners or from outside investment. Some clubs have done it. Clubs like Luton have just done it in recent years, but it's incredibly difficult to do.
You meet this wonderful woman, and now you got to move to Canada, and so the deal is you got to work in radio. So where did you wind up working in radio?
I couldn't leave Toronto for a year because my wife was doing a master's degree at York. So I couldn't initially run off and do whatever I wanted. So I did street team work for Flow 93.5. I worked very briefly at Virgin, doing the same thing, and then worked at CTN. So that was about a year I did doing that. And I was desperately trying to apply for jobs in Southern Ontario. But, that's a really competitive market because a lot of people want to stay in Toronto and then commute to, Barrie or wherever it might be. And then once my wife graduated and I got the all clear to apply further afield, I started sending out my demo tape to all places, and it was tricky. I never lost I've never once worried about my accent and being English in Canada, because for me, I moved to Canada. I'm becoming a Canadian. I'm going to make this work. But looking back, it was tricky. It was tricky as a new and a newer immigrant to get that first job. But then one day I got a phone call from Nesta Matthews, who said, "Do you want to come work at the Juice in Kelowna?" And I said yes before I put the phone down, and got on a plane, and we were gone within 3 or 4 days, I think. I mean, it was really quick how quickly we got to Kelowna. And that was what, around this time, July, June of 2010, was when I made my first move to Kelowna, and it all became real. For the first time, I actually had a proper radio job, and I was on the radio.
That's not a terrible place to go.
No, it's not. Could have been a heck of, and I applied to all of them. Don't get me wrong. I was very lucky to start off in Kelowna. Very lucky. I've been lucky with all my markets I've worked in. I've never really had to go to the some of the more challenging rural markets that can be difficult. But I was up for it. It didn't really bother me where I went, to be honest. I think my wife probably had, because she's stayed on every radio move with me. I didn't meet her along the way. She was there from day one, from before we even started to now. She's been on every single move. And every time I say to her, "Hey, I'm applying to this job," I've never sometimes thought about the sharp inhale of breath that she must have had at some of the markets I was applying to.
After you went to Kelowna, I think you did some stuff in Nelson.
I did,
and
yeah.
That's an interesting place.
It was.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so what I know about Nelson, because I had somebody who was employed here from Nelson, but I also know radio-wise that my neighbor, who was across the street from me, she worked at Kootenay Co-op.
Right.
So I know that Nelson has they're very attached to their radio. I mean, if you got something like Kootenay Co-op in your market, people are attached to the radio. Yeah. So, but meanwhile, you're doing things there, working at 103.5 The Bridge. So yeah. Tell me about that station. Tell me about Nelson.
Nelson was a really eclectic town. It it's a beautiful place. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful places in all of Canada. There's no two ways about it. It's very difficult to get to. It's 7 hours from Calgary and 8 hours from Vancouver. I mean, it really is remote. But it's unbelievably beautiful, and they've kept their downtown intact. They put rules in so they couldn't demolish some of the great buildings. The people there are, they're very protective of the town. You're not from Nelson until you've been there for like 25 years, right? There'll be people that say, I've lived there 15 years. They're like, you're still new, So as a guy like me that had been there not long, and I was only there for a year or so, it was difficult to kind of ingratiate yourself into the town. And I think the difficult part is not that I was blunt about this, but my plan was to get to a major market. I wasn't trying to put that in people's faces, but my career was not going to end in Nelson. I wanted to move on, and people wanted you to stay in Nelson and stay long term and commit to the town because it's such a community driven town. And I think that I found that a little tricky. I found the remoteness of it quite tricky as well. But the people were unbelievable. I met some of the most unique and interesting people I've ever met in Canada. It was an interesting, bizarre smorgasbord of people that had moved from not just all over, Canada, but across the world that had been there. And the talent I was working with, looking back, was mad. Like Drex Wilcombs is my program director, who's clearly gone on to great things. Matt DeBurs was our intern, mornings at Kissin. Matt Soper was our midday host, who's now doing so well in Niagara Falls. TJ Connors was with us for a while. He went on to have a great career in Winnipeg and Niagara Falls. So
that sounds like an all-star team.
It was crazy. I mean, at the time, you don't know it, right? These are just your friends and family. These are just people that work. They're talented, obviously, but you don't know what's going on. It's only when I look back that I'm like, my God, we're in the middle of nowhere with like people that have gone on to have these amazing careers. It was just wild, absolutely wild that we got to work with so many great people, in such a small town, and it was all hands on deck, There wasn't many of it. Although it sounds like a lot, we were running 2 stations, Castlegar and Nelson. There wasn't a lot of us there, and it was the all hands on deck, get things done, voice track, record everything, do every remote possible. It was a sort of learning curve. I think a lot of talent need in the industry. But yeah, looking back, the people that were there, remarkable.
And then you moved to Edmonton afterwards.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure if this makes your wife happy or sad.
She was back in a major. She had a mall close by and an airport that could get her back home. She was happy for the move to Edmonton for sure. Yeah, that was a big move.
But I want to talk about the station there, which back in 2012, in that period, you're working at 102.3 now, and that radio station has legendary attributes in that it's number one. It comes out with a big marketing scheme. It changed the market. When the market got sleepy in 2009, 2010, they came in and did things. So tell me, and I think this is a perfect fit for anybody with a personality. And a lot of the radio industry looks at that station and goes, how do we replicate that here? A lot of people cannot do that. So tell me about 102.3 now, your experience there in that era.
Yeah, I mean, it was, working it now, and the people I worked for eventually kind of gave me my voice and made me the host that I am today. Up until that point, I still think I was playing radio, trying to get better, reaching out to various people and getting air checks. But, it was Mark Hunter that took a chance on me and brought me out to Edmonton. And I remember walking into that building for the very first time and meeting everybody that worked on the station. And I've never felt so intimidated in all my life. I mean, there's just talent everywhere. There's just amazing radio happening everywhere. No one's taking a day off. All day parts sound like they could all be doing mornings, wherever they want. Like you meet Crash and Mars, who are the success that they've had is obviously, kind of speaks for itself. And the first person I met was Adam McHale. And, listening to Adam's show, you're like, my God, this is on middays. So this sounds like this could be hosting anywhere at once. Rachel Day on Drive. And, even at that time, we ended up going on to have 2 or 3 swing announcers, but the other swing announcer with us, Fitzy, this guy was working like we are, kind of 7 till midnight, and his show sounds fantastic. It was incredibly intimidating. And it was at that moment, it was like, you got to sink or swim. You've either got to make this or you're not going to last very long here, because the standard was just too high. And I thrived off that personally. I loved that. And I loved that feeling that I took confidence from it, that my program director had said, no, we want you to be here. And I wanted to compete at that level. And I wanted to try and see if I could be at the standard that they were all at. And I got a huge rush off of it, which was awesome. And then working there, for 5 years or so, was just so much fun. It really was. I remember for a couple of friends of mine would often say we'd have to pinch ourselves and go, remember, these are the good times, right? This is a great place to be. And we tried to, remember, this is going so well. Like, we're having such great success, and the radio is clearly so good. You gotta take a moment to breathe here and enjoy this. And it really was. It was just a fascinating time.
So this is going to be a question that I rarely get to ask.
Okay.
Because not everybody gets to, go into Edmonton and then come out of Edmonton. And there's, varied responses. How is the Edmonton market different than the rest of Canada?
That's a great question. How's it different? When I went to Edmonton, Edmonton, I lived in Toronto and certainly in BC. Alberta itself has such a bad rap. And I was like, okay, well, I wonder what that's about. Alberta of the North and what have you. When I got to Edmonton, I had nothing but great memories in Edmonton, nothing. And I think the thing that really stood out to me, and everyone kind of says this, but it's the people. It's the people there, the way they reacted to me and to my family on kind of a binary level was just unbelievable. They were so welcoming, made me feel like I became a Canadian citizen whilst I was working in Edmonton. And the way they just opened their arms and welcomed me in. People at the bar would come up and say, "Oh, I've heard you're becoming a citizen. Congratulations." All towns and all cities have their people, but the Edmontonians, the way they really, when we had my son when I was there, I became a citizen. That will happen within like a year. It's just really welcoming, warm people. And I'll never forget that. They treated me and my family extremely well.
Yeah, I feel like we have a lot of similar experiences. So I had my kids as well in Edmonton.
Oh, really?
Edmonton does not feel like Alberta. So whatever you hear that comes out of the news, and Alberta does this, Alberta does that, it's not really a reflection on Edmonton. I find we would play. I played most of my football career in my 20s in Edmonton. It's at beer league level. Shout out to the Comets, everybody. But there was a lot of ethnicity. We're playing a Portuguese team. We're playing a German team. We're going to play an Arabic team. We're going to play something. And I learned that Edmonton had just more diversity than the rest of the province. And I go to Calgary and we go to the Stampede, and I said, this is the biggest collection of trailer park trash ever assembled in one place. I never said that. I never said that. The Rock said that when he came out to do a wrestling match, but he was not wrong.
I'm a big wrestling fan. Yeah, I know the Rock would cut that promo. The thing about Calgary that I found that is, the biggest difference between the two cities is that I've noticed, having lived in both, and I've spent longer in Calgary than I have in Edmonton, is, Calgary is an outrageously good city in terms of the infrastructure that is here, in terms of how this city is built, in terms of what it offers. This is a great city that really is for me on a world-class level. And Calgarians will not show off about it. They won't. They don't go on about it. Whereas I think Edmonton has a little bit, and people would tell me that when they're in Edmonton, they'd have a chip on their shoulder about Calgary. They felt that Ralph Klein gave all the money to Calgary because of his connections there, etc. And there was a chip. And I think that's kind of what made the people what they are, and made them what I'm very proud about Edmonton, and always want to say, no, Edmonton's got its stuff. And that's the difference between the two cities. Calgarians just will not engage in that. They're very, most cities kind of do show off a little bit. Calgarians don't. Calgarians feel very calm and relaxed. We've got a good city. We know we do. We don't need to get involved in that kind of intercity banter. I mean, sure, when the Flames play the Oilers, there's banter. Yes, there is. But I don't feel that's the sort of need from Calgarians. And they're kind of a bit more relaxed about it in that sense. And that's what my friends in Edmonton always say to me whenever they always give me crap for being here now. But at the end of it, they'll go, "Hey, you've got a great city." They'll kind of begrudgingly tell me that at the end, right? It's always quite fun.
So, by the way, wedged in the middle of all the Alberta experience that you have is your time in London. So how did you get to London? Because you did 97.5, which is Virgin Radio and was at the time.
I did, yeah. Short stint. I'd been at Now for 3 years. We'd done really well. I was loving it. I wanted to stay in Edmonton. I wanted to buy a house. I wanted to commit there. My wife at this point had done, 5 years away from home. We'd had our son. We'd got married. And then a call came in about going to London, Ontario, which was, an hour away from where she was raised. My wife's from Guelph. And my wife said, "I need you to consider this. This is going to be a big one for me." And we ended up taking it. I had a gut feeling that it wasn't the right move for me, kind of stylistically. But I didn't. It was tough to say to my wife, "No, we're not going to move back to an hour from home with, an 11-month-old baby and your grandparents around the corner." And unfortunately, it didn't work out. Stylistically, it didn't work out the way I wanted, which is a real shame, because it would have been great to have lived and spent some more time in London. London's a great city. I loved London. I thought it was a great city that had a lot to offer, who really loved their radio. But I just, it was the first time I hadn't really made a success of something in radio, which was quite difficult for me. Everything had been on the up and up until that point. And then you get there and it's just not quite working the way you want it. And it's like, oh man, I'll try and push through this. And it didn't work, which is something I had to accept and learn from. And eventually got let go. So, it was then my wife and I had to decide, well, what do we do next? And that was challenging for us, very challenging for my wife, because we end up going back to Edmonton. And I know that was difficult for her and a big sacrifice. And I think it just goes to show, many of those of us that have had partners that have followed us through our career, some of the sacrifices they have to make in order for our careers to work. It doesn't get the respect that it deserves. We should talk about it more, because they do so much to make our careers work. And, she certainly proved that in that case.
Yeah, I feel like I should be interviewing her.
She gave you some. I tell you, we always say, I say this to my current boss, Jonathan Best. Radio wives know radio. They know radio better than most consultants. Boy, do they know radio. We will sit around and we'll be having a drink. And my wife, she doesn't love radio like I do. She doesn't want to talk about it. But we'll be sitting around and I'll be talking about local gossip or something. And she'll just pipe in with a line or a word and say, that show's not bad. That show's better than you think. That show connects there. That show needs more time. That show needs this. And I'll look at her and go, really? I don't think so. And sure enough, it will come to pass. She'll be exactly right.
Right. So I started this podcast so that people could get great ideas. And so program directors, if you are listening to this, have some get-togethers, invite the wags.
Get the wives and girlfriends involved. Yeah. They know so much about the business and they've listened to so much, Matt, because they've listened to us, right? When you come home and I come home from work, the radio's always on. My kids and my wife listen, right? And they love radio, but they're listening because they want to listen to their dad and to their husband and be a supportive partner and family member. But they're also listening to the swing announcer that's on after me. And they're also listening to the midday host that's on before me. And they're listening to promos from the morning show. And they become a huge focus group. even my kids are obsessed with Today Radio, which I currently work on. They can tell you so much about it, and they're going to become a great idea. As they get older, they're going to know a lot about the business, and I'm going to want to tap into them as I unfortunately start to ascend towards middle age. I'm going to need to know what they're thinking.
Yeah, it's true. It's like a hockey team or a football team where, the wags they're living this every day. So they're listening to the sports station. They're watching the games. They're paying attention to all the games because their husbands are invested in this particular career. I don't know how much somebody like Gareth Southgate is going to pay attention to whoever Jude Bellingham is dating for a strategy on when to do the subs come this weekend. And and as we record this, by the way, the Euro final is going to be England versus Spain. We've completely ill-timed this, when we're recording this. But yeah, it's definitely something to pay attention to, whether it's a radio station or a football club.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I as I say, my wife has proven time and time again, and not just my wife for that matter. I've spoken to other radio partners along the way. They have a good ear for the business. They know what's right. They know what's wrong. If I was a program director, I would certainly invite them all round into a boardroom, put some pizza and some mimosas out or whatever, and run a little mini focus group. I think you'd learn a huge amount from them.
So how did you get to Calgary?
So, I went back to Now. And when I went back to Now Radio,
because you went back to Edmonton and then you get the opportunity to go to Calgary.
And the reason why was we decided to go back to somewhere that we knew, because we're doing all these moves, and we thought, and there were a couple of other opportunities that came my way after London. There were some big moves, and I was like, oh gosh, do I really want to? I've got a young family. It's another uncertain move. Now kind of gave us some foundation, some security. We knew people, we knew the radio station. But when I got there, management and I were kind of on the same path, that it was like, eventually we'll probably look to find particularly a daytime slot for us, because I've been doing evenings and weekends at that point for a really long time. And I wanted to have a more established schedule with my son. At that point, I think my daughter was on the way, or it was very close to my daughter being on the way. And we wanted a more established schedule. And it was shortly after I got back to Now that our management team at Now, we had been bought by Patterson Media at this point, through this whole process, took over the Calgary operation for Patterson. And at that point, some opportunities came my way, and there was an opportunity to go and do afternoon drive. So I arrived back in Now in March of 2016, and then I moved to Calgary in the summer of 2017. Through that process, opportunities came my way. And I've been here 7 years now. I mean, I've been on afternoon drive for 7 years. Like, it's been a long time.
That's like the best. By the way, that's the best shift.
Oh, it's honestly, like, I love afternoon drive. I always have. I mean, my favorite announcer growing up in England was Chris Moyles. He's kind of my hero, really, when it comes to radio. A lot of what I do on the show really harks back to bits that he did that I've taken and tweaked and stuff. There's a lot of homages on Rob and Friends that there is from Chris Moyles, because he influenced me in a way that I can't even really explain. And I remember, when I first heard him, he was on afternoons, which is one of the reasons I like doing afternoons. I like driving people home. I like being part of that moment where you get to go home and it's the end of the day and there's that exuberation, or that we're done for the day. And that kind of comes from Moyles. And, my connection to Chris Moyles, at least here, is so great. I remember being at school for the first time. We'd sit in assembly, and usually at that time people would say, oh, have you heard this latest band or this, movie? And it would go on to be huge pop culture icons of the 90s, like Oasis or Blur or Trainspotting. And then one day someone said, have you listened to Chris Moyles? And I went, no, who's Chris Moyles? And he's on Radio 1. And I was like, who listens to, no, radio? That's not cool. But Radio 1 was really cool. Like for a while there, Radio 1 was absolutely just banging when it came to great radio. And I got in the car, listened to Chris Moyles with my mum. That was 1997. and listened to him every day until I left. I mean, the guy was a huge inspiration on me. And even though he obviously went on to have greater success in mornings and hosts a morning show now, I always remember that afternoon show that he hosted, which I thought was just the coolest thing. And, you know, in my own little way, in my mind, I feel like I'm paying homage to it every time I crack the mic in the afternoons.
So I was working in Edmonton at that period, but I remember air checks of Chris, and I remember 1FM and the imaging, and pretty much everything on that radio station was so polished.
Yeah, and it's just the standard of the stuff they were doing at that time was just absolutely wild. I mean, you know, some of the best hosts, you know, it started with kind of Chris Evans in like 1995, who, you know, at that point, Chris Evans was the biggest television presenter in the UK, and then came on to radio afterwards, which normally it goes the other way. And that was just the most wild thing. And then Chris kind of burned out, and Chris Moores came in, and then there were so many others that came in, and so much other just amazing radio that was happening. I mean, some really experimental radio like Chris Morris and Blue Jam, which if you can find on YouTube is the most bizarre radio you'll ever hear in your life. I mean, really kind of altruistic, kind of, you know, out there, bizarre radio. It's just, you know, it doesn't even have a format to it. It's just random music playing and then bits coming in and out of it. And this was happening on Radio 1, a national radio station, and it was happening late night. But it was some brilliant radio, yeah.
Life travels fast, time travels fast, because I just realized that it's been 7 years for 1015 Today Radio. I still sort of think of it as sort of something new that Calgary has that sort of grew out of Edmonton.
They launched in 2019. It's 5 years old.
Right.
But then the pandemic happened, right, and took away like 2 years of our lives. So you're right. To me, Today Radio feels like it's 3 years old because 2 years became one. But yeah, it is 5 years. It's been there a while. And then Cool FM before that. But you know, people like Taylor Daniels and I were on that station before. This whole iteration has been kind of 7 years or so. Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about the format and how it's received in Calgary, because I know there's a lot of hand wringing and teeth gnashing and radio stations that want to emulate what happened in Edmonton at 102.3 Now Radio. Let's roll that out. And I sort of asked a lot of radio executives, said, why are we not rolling this out across the country? And this is back in the 2012, 2013, 2014. Like, why are we not rolling that out? And I got, it's very expensive. The marketing budget, it would suck up most of the marketing budget for this company. We can't sort of pour that into one radio station that's currently in one share. Oh, that's a great idea. And now we get to this era, 2019, 2020. Okay, now we're going to do it. So how is it received in your market? But how do you think the format, first of all, tell everybody what the format is, and then say how it's received in Calgary.
Well, the format it's interesting. We have a lot of conversations about it, my boss and I love talking about this because, you know, I've been doing this type of radio for 12 years. It's been it is really the basis of my career. The format is essentially conversational radio, right? Where we're having a conversation with the audience, but it's a bit more than that. And I think that's sometimes where it's kind of misjudged by people that haven't worked in the buildings. Is that, yes, we are having conversations with the audience, but really it's based on two things. It's interactive radio, where we build a connection with our audience and try and build a community amongst our audience, give our audience the feeling that they can run and drive and own the radio station, give them some power and some agency in a world that sometimes feels a little bit one-directional. Let's make this a two-way exchange. And then secondly, and perhaps most importantly, it's personality-driven radio. We want the personalities to shine. And on all iterations of, and that's what made Now so great in Edmonton. And it's what I think the other radio stations that are rolling this out today being one. It's not just about the morning show being the top of the ticket and then the drive show and then maybe, you know, music in middays and not much in evenings. It's about any time you turn on the radio that you're hearing big personality. You're hearing games, you're hearing bits, you're hearing features, and then you're hearing the audience. And that's really the focus of what it's all about. As regards to how Calgary has worked with it, I think, the audience has kind of wrapped around really well to what Today's tried to do. I think at first, I think they were perhaps a tad apathetic at first when we first launched about, well, what are we doing here? You have to remember, like I mentioned earlier, Calgary's got the mountains 45 minutes away. It's this big city. People are working, big jobs. I'm not sure the connection was quite there at first, but I think when we kind of launched this Today and we realized, hey, we want you guys to kind of take over this radio station, people kind of went, oh, okay, well, how does that work? And they kind of dipped their toe in, and then slowly but surely, we kind of won them over one by one. And, I like to think now on Rob and Friends specifically, the afternoon show, my show, we have a great connection with our audience, to make them feel like their voice needs to be heard, on a daily, hourly, minutely basis.
It says Rob and Friends, but who are your friends?
Who are my friends? So the idea is that I want the whole radio station to be represented on the station. So in Edmonton, they call the audience the Now family, in a way, again, to have that community feel amongst the audience. In Calgary, we call the audience friends, and try again. So it's not just, hey, audience members. There's a bit more of a colloquial feel amongst us. So Rob and Friends, initially, the whole concept was the audience would be my co-host. And the mission statement of the show is to have an audience member on literally every break, right? To have them on all the time. But the friends are also my friends around the station as well. And I have people that work on the show that put huge amounts of effort in to help me kind of build as big a show as I possibly can. So right now, our promotions coordinator, Brittany Crouch, is kind of a de facto producer of the show and puts in a huge amount of effort helping me kind of grow and manage the show and make sure all the audience are involved. Our midday host, Shane Hill, co-hosts with me an hour a day, and she and I have a little pocket of the show. And then there are so many others, our creative director, our promotions director. They're all involved in helping me bring certain things to the show so that when you listen, there's as many people on. It's kind of borrowing a little bit of that zoo format, again, back to Chris Moyles that he had. I wanted the show to sound as big as possible when we launched it. And I want to offer, in radio nowadays, we don't have what we had 30 years ago. I'm not a barrier of information anymore. I don't tell you when the next concert is. I don't tell you, really anything of any import. You have it in your phone, before I say anything. And what I can offer is entertainment, is me, is personality. And I want that to be as big as possible. And that's what we strive to do, is to have the biggest entertainment platform we can provide in Calgary every afternoon.
And also Winnipeg, because the company did fly you in to take a look at Winnipeg, and you were on the air here as well. So now you've got multiple markets to deal with.
That's right. We launched that in March. Obviously the industry's under a lot of stress and strain and a lot of changes, and the opportunity was presented to move to Winnipeg. And that was a great opportunity as well, when it was presented for the show, is we now move into Winnipeg. And we're trying to approach that slightly differently as well. I made the pitch to management that I wanted to be honest that I wasn't there. I didn't want to pretend that I was from Winnipeg. I wanted to be honest that, look, I am here with you. I am there. I'm answering every call. I'm answering every text. We are going to have a conversation. I'm going to talk about Winnipeg things. I'm going to travel to Winnipeg and I'm going to come and see you, but I am in Calgary. And I wanted that level of honesty, which, to be fair, I had seen happen in the UK, right? The UK has, national shows because we're only one time zone and it's a smaller region or geographical location. But I've always felt for many years since I've been here that something similar could work in Canada. Difficult with different time zones, of course, but not impossible. And I think, it's tough to know. I think that the Now family in Winnipeg on 94.3 Now Radio, I think are working with that because I'm not insulting their intelligence, right? And I'm saying, look, I'm not there, and I'm going to be honest with you. And I think that's working for them.
I think you and I connect because you mentioned politics and history, which are the two things that I have studied my whole life. So tell me why you love politics, and then tell me why you like history. And by liking history, like what's the most fascinating part of history?
When I was younger, I was incredibly politically motivated. I thought I was going to become an MP. I was so into the actual game of politics, which is so funny because on Today Radio specifically, we make a point of not talking politics, and I don't talk about it professionally. But privately, I love my politics. When I went to university, I was so keen to get in there and be this young whippersnapper that was going to argue with my professors and take them on in debates and really thrive in that. And after about 2 years of studying politics and debating, it kind of got beaten out of me. I kind of found that debating at that level every single day, I found that I was being challenged in a way that I should have been. But I found that eventually I started to lose a grip of what my politics were. And I wasn't entirely sure what I believed in and what I didn't. And that was tough to go through. And I kind of spent a couple of years, I kind of retracted slightly from politics. But now I'm back into it in a huge way. And where I've come back is kind of in a way I do from on the show, in terms of, although I don't talk politics, I love being inquisitive about people. I love learning about people. And that's my love of politics now. I love the story. I love the journey. I love the things that happen. I love, seeing the storylines that come out of it and the history, unfolding between our eyes. I mean, we are going to, if I was studying politics now, I would 100% take a course on Donald Trump. The idea that a reality TV star became the most dominating figure in politics over the last decade is absolutely mind-blowing. And how he's done it is shocking in every way. And he's torn up all of the things that I learned about American politics when I was at university. The things that we were told you can and cannot do as a president, he does. He does the opposite of, and has seen success. And from an academic perspective, that's mind-blowing to me. And back to your asking what my love of history is, it's 20th century history, and specifically 20th century American history. I did a dissertation on Richard Nixon, and his resignation as part of Watergate. And that was kind of my main thing. And that's kind of my main fascination now is, I can get really into it, is, Nixon, when he was resigned and he did the famous Frost Nixon interviews and then admitted that as president, if he did something, it wasn't illegal. And that was kind of the moment, the got you moment, where everyone went, he's admitting he did it. And that was the moment that America healed. And that was part of my dissertation. And now, of course, 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court have effectively admitted that if you are president, you can't be tried for illegal things. You can do things that are essentially illegal. If you're president, it's okay. It's amazing that moment has come full circle and mind blowing to me. Yeah, there's a small part of me that says, man, it would be good if I was independently wealthy. I'd go back to school and study all this all over again. But as I say, I don't study it from wearing a rosette on my chest and kind of, beating a political mind anymore. I study it more from the story and the historical element of it.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, just watching it from afar. America is the greatest reality show ever.
Wow, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, just mind blowing, just watching how everything's unfolding right now. Even as we talk right now, the big story is Joe Biden and his mental acuity, and just mind blowing as well. The state that the country finds itself in. And as I say, what I find more shocking is what I was studying kind of 20 years ago. When we used to say things in our class, my professors would tell me, no president, the last bald president that's been elected was Eisenhower, right? You need to have a good head of hair in order to run as president. Presidents won't have beards. It was this very vain, specific way to be a president. And now you've got these two octogenarians running out there, and it's just mind-blowing that how 25 years things have changed so much. This stuff fascinates me, and this is the stuff I read about and love. I don't know if it fascinates anyone else, but this is the sort of stuff that I think to myself, wow, this is a huge interest.
I heard that if you want to be president, you should be tall.
Correct.
If electability sort of lands on being tall, which is probably why dictators who achieve their status through a coup are short. Napoleon, for instance, right?
Yeah, right, for sure. Yeah, it's so interesting to see, as I say, the look and the feel in terms of the aesthetics of American politics, which completely seems thrown out right now. And I don't know if we'll ever get back to any sort of norm. As you know, at some point, whether it be through getting a second term or whether losing this next election, Donald Trump moves on from center stage of Republican politics. That does tend to be how American politics comes. People do have their moments and move on. Will it go back to any sort of normality, or is this the new normality? And these storylines, they fascinate me hugely.
Tell me a little bit about your sports tree. So I know you're invested in football. How much hockey do you watch?
Yeah, hockey was kind of the first North American sport I got into when I moved to Toronto. I got to spend an internship at AM 640, and I got to work on the Bill Waters show with Greg Brady, and got to be a part of that, and got to see what kind of Maple Leafs fandom can be like, which is
troubled.
Much derided as it is across the country, it is a fascinating fan base to be around.
Oh, this is a psychological experiment.
I remember the night that Nazem Kadri made his preseason debut for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And so for those who don't know, Nazem Kadri, 7th overall pick, he is not projected to be a top tier superstar, but to be a good player, as he has gone on to be. And that night, you would have thought that Wayne Gretzky himself had reappeared on the ice to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, the whole fan base was coming unglued at the great hope that was Nazem Kadri. And I'm sitting there going, but this guy's 7th overall. We know this guy's not going to be a franchise player. He's going to be a good player. He's not going to be a franchise player. And people were just obsessed to the hopes and the dreams. And there was something in a weird way endearing about that. And I found myself kind of getting connected to it.
Yeah. So Leafs Nation is so full of shit. Like it's unbelievable. It is such a terrible. The fans are worse than the team. So the team feeds this shit. The fans buy it. The media, and you worked in it and saw it and just expressed it, are actually a giant part of the problem by making somebody like Kadri the next coming of Gretzky. This is a cycle that just goes on and on and on. And if you want to know why this team never gets past the first round, this is part of the problem. The fans are a giant part of the problem. The players and the management are part of the problem because they keep paying these people money and they're not very good. And it goes on and on. And so it's basically it's the Dallas Cowboys. So it is. So the Leafs are the Dallas Cowboys. What is the football equivalent in the Premier League of this? Because I got to know. I got to put a third team in here. So the Dallas Cowboys suck, full of shit, never going to win. Leafs suck, full of shit, never going to win, and it's all the fans' fault. It's all your fault. So what is the Premiership equivalent?
I mean, until recent years, you probably could have said it might have been Liverpool, might have fit that bill a little bit.
Yeah.
Liverpool, kind of, they've won trophies now since in the last few years under Jurgen Klopp. They have a very, it's slightly different. They have a very strong fan base because Liverpool as a city kind of sees itself actually kind of separate to England. There's kind of like a Scouse separatism that goes on there, which is a whole different kind of political element. But they would have been part of it. There's some element that my club, Tottenham, are kind of similar to that as well. They're not the biggest club in the way that, say, the Cowboys and the Leafs are kind of the biggest fan base and the biggest market. They don't have that element, but they haven't won anything since the 60s. The fans can often seem to be quite obnoxious.
Okay, so that could be that's Buffalo Bills territory right there.
There we go. And that's kind of a theme throughout all of my fandoms, right? Like I pick teams that to start at the bottom to hopefully see the moment that they finally get to the top. So my teams are the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Toronto Blue Jays, Tottenham Hotspur, the Cleveland Browns. I mean, goodness me, what did I do when I chose them? That was mind blowing. And then England, right? England as the national team, and then England have their game on Sunday as we record this in the European Championship final against Spain. You love Spain. If anyone follows your social media, they know that you're there every year and you love you. I mean, so you'll be cheering Spain on, I'm sure. But
no, actually, you know what? Yes and no.
Really?
So I was kind of there at the beginning. I was in Malaga when the new Spanish team was unveiled, and they were going to say, this is the team we're going with, and they'd sort of departed with some old people, and we have a new coach. They won the first game against Norway without Holland, and then they traveled 2 days later to go play Scotland and got boat raced by Scotland 2-0. And, you know, the papers go nuts, and what is this team about? And it's built from there, but here we are at the end. So the team is really built for this moment, which is coming up on Sunday, which is going to be England versus Spain. And while it'd be nice for Spain to win, I go back to 1996, and I was in Cheltenham when Southgate missed the kick.
You were there. You were in England.
I was in England because my friend Tim, who is in Calgary, he is a teacher in Calgary. So he moved from Cheltenham to Calgary, just like you. A very similar journey. And Southgate missing, I said, can this guy just get one? England can win, but I want Southgate to have his redemption because I felt so terrible for him.
Well, that was the one that, I mean, Euro 1996 is the most, is that, you know, if I was to write a coming of age John Hughes movie about myself, it would be about that summer. And it would be about Euro 96, which was the defining memory of my childhood. And I remember being in the pub with my dad when Southgate missed. And actually before that, which is, you have to be really into soccer to know this, it was a sudden death situation in extra time. They don't have that rule anymore. And the ball went
the alleged golden goal.
The alleged golden goal. And the ball went flying across the goal line, and Paul Gascoigne, all he had to do was just slide in and score. And he missed it by like a millimeter. And my dad jumped up and smashed his stool that he was sitting on, his bar stool. And I was standing right beside him as a 14-year-old. And I was like, whoa. And then Southgate missed, and it was just an unbelievable time. And if I can just elaborate, England and watching them win is the thing that drives me sports-wise. It's the thing that I have to see in my life. It's the moment I need. And I arranged my whole summer around being here in Calgary. My parents are visiting right now, so I could watch the semi-final and final with my dad. I had it manifested in my mind it would happen, that England would win this time and that we would watch it together. And then my vacation got cancelled by the WestJet strike. And it's been rescheduled for this Sunday. And I will be flying during the final of Euro 2024. And I won't watch that with my dad. But I did get the semi-final with him. And the last-minute goal, we were in the Ship and Anchor, which is a great pub here in Calgary. And I got to stand beside him and my good friend Tim. And Ollie Watkins scored that last-minute goal. And I did get that great moment. But I will miss the final, which is, I don't mind telling you, people will think I'm just being exuberant. It is killing me that I'm missing this final. Like I've thought of every possibility imaginable. How do I make this final? And I can't make it happen, Matt. The universe has conspired against me.
Wow. That's incredible. So I am pulling for England in a way because Southgate needs his match now. Spain will always be there. I look at somebody like Yamal. Yamal's got at least another 10 tries at this thing. So
oh god, Yamal's 16 years old. Yeah. My Southgate missing that penalty. You know, he needs his redemption. I thought he was going to get it 3 years ago. He didn't. It would be, honestly, I get emotional thinking of Southgate sitting beside that trophy. He's not been a particularly great manager for England, and yet he's had so much success. It's been so bizarre. Like, if you watch the Slovakia game...
Well, maybe it's because he might be a good manager.
But in every way...
Why do we do this? Why do we bang on the coach all the time?
I'm just judging him by the evidence of my own eyes. Like he like when we played Slovakia 2 weeks ago, it's the worst performance I've ever seen from an England team ever. It was so bad, and yet somehow last minute goal from Jude Bellingham, a goal from Harry Kane extra time, and we go through. And the same with Switzerland. We were terrible against Switzerland.
Why don't you look across the ocean? Canada got to a semi-final on the same sort of. It's not ineptitude, but it's just the path. It's the way it unfolds.
Well, and that was, that was a huge moment. Canada making the semi-final of Copa America. I mean, that's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. They did that, and the way they played and watching this thing. I think there's a slight difference between how England are playing and how Canada are playing, because I'm watching this team grow in front of my eyes. So sometimes I'll see them go forward and play like they're a top level international side. And then you'll see the goal they conceded, against Venezuela. And you're like, my God, you wouldn't see that on a rec field anywhere in London. The defending was quite poor. And that's kind of where this team is at right now. I mean, the same with against Argentina, that first goal for Julian Alvarez. I mean, those two centre backs so far apart. I mean, that's mind-blowingly bad. And then yet you'll see them do something up front that you're like, whoa, where's this coming from? This looks cool quality. This program's going to grow over the next 10 years. Soccer's growing. We're seeing that with cavalry in Calgary right now. I'm loving watching soccer grow in this country. Honestly, it's one of the biggest passions I have, is seeing soccer grow in this country. And it is growing. And it's becoming a bigger and bigger sport. That I could talk about that for another hour. Like it's so much fun watching it grow.
So I played football in Edmonton, and I thought, 99 Gold Cup, we won that. Yeah. And I thought, this is going to grow. But then I saw Michael Owen. He was playing in Calgary, and then he went and played for England. And I'm like,
Owen Hargreaves.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, and then I saw Owen Hargreaves,
right?
And he would play. I thought, he's going to play for Canada, and then he went and played for England, and I was like, maybe we won't grow.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? I think we've got a different world now than we had then, when you had the likes of the De Guzman brothers and various people that wouldn't even play for Canada. I mean, that was how bad things were. There were good players that just wouldn't play. I think things are different now. I think that the work that John Herdman did over the last kind of few years, I mean, the impact he's had on Canadian soccer, both men's and women's, is phenomenal. That man is an absolute legend of the game. And now, if we can keep Jesse Marsh, I know that a lot of Canadians that kind of have a passing interest in football be like, Jesse Marsh, who's this? And Jesse Marsh has been a top coach around Europe, right? He's coached in Germany, he's coached in England, coached Premier League, Bundesliga. This guy knows his stuff.
Leeds, right?
Yeah, he was at Leeds for a short while. I didn't have a huge amount of success there, but still, managing the Premier League. For Canada to have that as their manager, as their coach, that's a high standard. And you're seeing some of the effects we're having now. And some of the players we've got. I mean, Tejan Buchanan plays for Inter Milan. Alphonso Davies could be at Real Madrid by the end of this summer. Already is at Bayern Munich. Jonathan David is supposed to be being touted to Premier League clubs. Tottenham are interested in him. Manchester United as well. Kyle Laren's playing European football.
He's in Mallorca.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot
on loan, but he's in Mallorca.
Yeah, I mean, he's playing at a high standard. Then you've got players like Jacob Schaffelberg, who I think is the second best player in the entire team. He's going to be in Europe sometime soon. That guy is just too good. Alistair Johnson's at Celtic. I think he's going to make a step up. And, we're seeing more and more and more players now playing at a high level. It's not just the odd couple here and there. It's not just the Tiba Hutchinson on his own and a bunch of nothing, with all due respect to those players that played alongside with him. There's now a whole squad coming through. And what I loved about what Jesse Marsh said after they went out is he's putting pressure on the Canadian Premier League in the sense that, okay, let's find more young players. And not to be disparaging to the Canadian Premier League, they're doing a great job. And I love what they're doing right now. I'm such a supporter of that league. But it's just great to see a Canadian national team have a national league that it can talk to. And we're starting to have the building blocks in place now. We've got a national league. We've got a proper setup. It's got its problems. Canada soccer's, supposedly in a huge amount of debt. It's got major problems that we've still got to work out. But to your point about the Gold Cup win 25 years ago, I think we're in a vastly different space to grow than we were then. And that, as a fan, excites me that my children will have a proper Canadian team to follow going into the 2030s.
Yeah, I was in '98. I went to what was Commonwealth Stadium in Edmonton and watched Canada lose 2-0 to Trinidad and Tobago. I was horrified. We promoted it. We gave away tickets. And I said, you got to win this. And I think it was Ashley Cole who, I think he potted a goal. But, he dominated the game. We can't, it's Canada. We can't lose to toboggans.
Well, I mean, one I remember was when they needed to, I think, get a draw with Honduras to make the final stage of CONCACAF qualifying. I think it was for 2014 or 2018. And they lost 8-1. 8-1 to Honduras. And I was like, my God, I mean, that's not just a loss, that's an absolute humiliation.
Yeah.
And that felt like the nadir, right? There's no coming back from that. That just breaks careers. And somehow, not just on the back of Alphonso Davies, but driven largely by him, they have come back, and they've now qualified for a World Cup in their own right. They will be there in 2026. It's easier to make World Cups now because World Cups have expanded to 48 teams. And so there's every reason now that Canada hopefully can be at Copas if they continue to invite CONCACAF teams and World Cups and see where this goes, because it's a hugely exciting time. And hopefully those days that you speak of losing in '98, that's all behind us now.
I kind of love watching places like the U.S. and Mexico right now. They're rather delusional about where they think they are and where they need to be.
Yeah.
And it's just, super wide. And shout out to Jesse Marsh, who was turned down for the job in the U.S. and they didn't even make it out of the group stage. And I was like, well, I think we need to get rid of our coach, and we probably should have hired this guy. And now they're coming back going, can we still get him? And no, you cannot.
It worries me. I'm worried they might come in for Marsh, to be honest with you. But then, I don't know, U.S. soccer's all over the place. I mean, they apparently yesterday they were going after Jurgen Klopp, who's just left Liverpool. And I was like, there's not in a million years is Jurgen Klopp going to manage the USA. Like, that's never happening.
Yeah. So Jurgen Klopp is going to look at those players and say no.
Yeah.
And nobody will acknowledge this, but I'll just say it, the quiet part out loud. And that's, if you pay him $10 million a year, you're going to have to pay the women's coach that same amount.
Right.
And the whole thing will melt down. And they've already had multiple meltdowns over the last, 5 to 7 years over whether it's equal payment, who gets money for what. I mean, it's dysfunctional from the inside, and you don't have the players. So Jurgen Klopp is not coming to coach you.
They're not coming to coach, no. And of course, there's a whole conversation to be had about equal pay for in terms of women's sport and men's sport, and that's growing throughout the world. And I think we'll probably see that go in a progressive direction. Would be my guess. But the problem not the problem, but the argument I think the women are making both in Canada and the US is their women's national teams have been wildly more successful than the men's teams, right? I mean, the women have won 3 World Cups in the last 30 years. So the Canadian women have won an Olympic gold medal. And yes, there's more money in the men's game, et cetera, but I'm really excited about the growth of the women's game. I'm excited to see this Northern Women's League. I forget the name of it now off the top of my head. That's supposed to start next year. Calgary has a team. It's something I'm really excited about. The women's game has grown hugely over the last 20 years. I actually tend to follow Canada more than I do England when it comes to that, because I've become such a huge fan of the Canadian women's national team. We go to see Cavalry play every week. We're season ticket holders here in Calgary, which is our local Canadian Premier League team for the men. But my daughter asks, where are the women? And it'll be cool to go and show her a women's team down at McMahon next season and go and see some games there. So it's such a thrill. It's such a thrill to see the game grow in this country, as I said earlier. I absolutely love it.
Good. Well, I hope it does this time. I really thought in the 2000s early on that it would take off, and it didn't really happen. We sort of lagged, but here we are now, and it's good stuff.
Who's your team, by the way? You seem to be extreme. I know you like your football. We've spoken about on Instagram from time to time, but you seem to be extraordinarily well versed in the game. So who are your teams?
I have no team. I
No
just
team.
watch. I have no team. I just watch. And it's see, my life is tied up in the Buffalo Bills, and that takes
Right.
up most of my energy. And so I'm not sure that I could get emotionally invested into any particular club to lose my mind over.
I love having a club. I need a club. To get into a sport, I need a club. I need my team. I need my colors. I need my jersey. I've always
I mean,
found
if you're going to make me pick, I'll take Barcelona. I think your first one is always the one. So the Buffalo Bills were my first NFL adventure. I've been a fan forever, and been through the heartache. I've seen most of it. It's sad. I have unusual meltdowns every year based on their performance. But when it comes, 2018 was my first football match in Europe, and I saw Messi score 3 goals, and I said, well, maybe this will be my team.
Where are you? I'm going to interview you for a second. Where are you at on the Bills right now? I mean, they've struggled to get over the line. They've clearly got the talent in Josh Allen. They've made some changes in the offseason here. I think Stephon Diggs has gone. I mean, are they primed to make a move in 2024, or are they? Where are you at with them?
They're so close. They're perpetually close, right? It's a missed field goal. It's as long as Patrick Mahomes is there, I think the task is going to be tall.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to win a championship, there's going to have to be maybe some extraneous outside things that are going to have to happen. Somebody may need to beat Patrick Mahomes along the way to do it. And, we can talk about Tyler Bass missing the field goal last year. And it doesn't matter if he makes the field goal, Patrick Mahomes is still going to win that game. Yeah. So I try not to get too delusional over the whole thing and the management. I'm just happy that the team is in good hands and that the Pagulas are taking care of the team and that we are contending every year. But the risk is that it becomes the Cleveland Browns. And the Cleveland Browns in the late 80s, 86 and 88, close, maybe shoulda, coulda, woulda. And that's my fears that the Buffalo Bills just sort of sit in that NFC, AFC championship tier and never quite get back to the big game.
The difficulty that I found, particularly with North American sport, I mean, in Europe it's different, particularly in soccer. If our teams are bad, we might get relegated, which is a whole different proposition. And so you support them just as furiously as if they were going for a league title because you don't want the indignity of being relegated. We don't have that in North American sports. And the banality of being awful is something I hate. I found it with the Browns when I first cheered for them. I mean, they won, 3 games in 3 years. I mean, it's just who watches that? It's tough to watch. When the Leafs tanked to go for Austin Matthews, that genuinely affected my fandom. It took me years to get it back because watching the team lose night after night is just not of any interest. You're not competitive in the least. So I think to your point about the fact the Bills are in good hands, and the Bills were terrible for a long time. Maybe I'm just a defeatist, but it must be good at least knowing that this season you are going to contend. You are going to make the playoffs. You're going to be in with a shout. You will be for the next at least 4 or 5, 6 seasons, however long that Allen remains, probably longer than that. At least you're in the conversation. It's better than just knowing before you even kick a ball or throw a ball in September that you're nowhere. Like, that's a horrible place to be.
Yeah. Rob, it's been awesome. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I love chatting. Thanks again. I really appreciate it. And here's hoping there's a good day on Sunday.
The Sound Off Podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Edited by Chloe Emo Lane. Social media by Aiden Glassy. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.